Should I-
Again, welcome everybody to Care Answered's webinar. We're so happy to have you here. This topic is very near and dear. I get lots of questions about SSDI, and I wanted to find an expert who could talk to all of us about it and share their expertise. And I was able to find one, thankfully. But let me introduce myself first. My name is Nicole Christensen. I'm the CEO of Care Answered. We provide patient advocacy and care coordination, navigating people through the health system to access their best care and to empower all patients. And that's partly the reason for this webinar series is to educate and help us to really advocate for ourselves as well. I am also the CEO of Answers for Care, which is a village of vetted professional senior care providers. And so it's a one-stop shop for all of the care needs from Medicaid to financial to patient advocates to home care and assisted living finder locators and finding the right placements for your family and loved ones. It's all there, all for you. I am also the author of the best-selling book From Crisis to Calm. So I'm really excited to have these webinars each week and especially for this topic again, which is SSDI. So the name of our webinar is Social Security Disability Insurance. What, who, how? Those are the questions that we hear all the time. And to talk about this important topic, we have Marie Elizabeth Villefranche. Am I saying it correctly?
Yes,
All right.
yes, you did.
Thank you, thank you,
You
thank you.
did.
It's such a beautiful name.
Oh, thank
Esquire.
you.
She is a disability attorney licensed to practice law in the state of New York since 2017. She is a graduate of Hunter College, BA. I am also alumni of Hunter, so woo! And also Rutgers University for her master's, and Benjamin and Cardozo School of Law for her JD. Marie works in a public interest nonprofit doing disability appeals from reconsideration to appeals counsel. Previously, she worked as a Medicaid attorney at several prominent elder law firms in Nassau County. Marie is admitted to practice in the Eastern District and the Southern District of New York. She is married, mother of two fabulous children, which is Eliza, 14, and Ethan, 5. And so I've known Marie professionally for a few years now, pre-COVID.
Mhm.
So whatever
Yes,
amount of years that
yes,
is.
yes.
And I worked with her professionally, and I'm happy to have her as part of that Care Answered family and to call her my friend. So without further ado, please, Marie Elizabeth, take it from
Thank you.
here.
Thank you. I am so excited to be joining you all today. And I have so much respect for Nicole. So when she called and she asked, would I be interested? And I'm like, of course, let's do this.
Thank you.
Um, So today my topic is slightly broader than SSDI. It's also going to include SSI. And I'll explain the difference between the two different programs. But as Nicole mentioned, the title of the talk today is Social Security Disabilities, What, Who, and How. And very typical of any attorney. Uh, there we go. Disclaimer. I have to start off by saying that, the information contained here it's not legal advice, and that legal advice depends on the specific facts of each situation, and these materials cannot replace the advice of a competent legal counsel. So for legal advice, I will direct you to seek legal counsel. And also the views expressed in this representation are the author's own and do not reflect the views of Cared Answered or the author's employer. So today's presentation, like I said, it's what, who, and how. The first question we're going to ask is, what is Social Security disability? And then we'll also talk about who is eligible for benefits. And then we will also talk about, we'll end with the majority of our talk really is, how is eligibility determined? And Social Security has a very specific process known as a 5-step process, which we'll talk about greatly when we get to that part. So starting off, what is Social Security disability? So the Social Security Administration, also known as SSA, has defined disability in a very concrete way. So disability, it's not simply the typical understanding of disability. There are very real, very discrete definitions to Social Security. So Social Security defines disability as the inability to do any substantial gainful activity, and I'll explain what substantial gainful activity is, by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment. I'll explain what they mean by that as well, which can be expected to result in death, or which will have lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of no less than 12 months. Now that's a mouthful, right? But in essence, what Social Security is saying is that there are really certain components that we need to look at when we look at what is disability for SSA's purposes. One is the gainful activity, the substantial gainful activity, and we'll talk about that in a moment, what Social Security means by that. There's also a medical component to disability, and thirdly, there's a duration component to Social Security, and we'll go into each of these categories next. So the first thing we'll look at is, what is substantial gainful activity? So for Social Security, substantial gainful activity is basically, it's a description of any level of work, activity, or earnings that the claimant, i.e. the applicant or the person who's applying, you'll hear me use the word claimant a lot during this presentation, but claimant is basically the person who is applying for disability. So it is any level of work that this person is earning, right? Social Security defines what SSGA is every year. What Social Security has done is that they have ascribed a specific monetary number to SGA. And what this means is, if a person is working at that level, it will certainly, at that level or higher, I should say, it will certainly impact their ability to get disability benefits. So in 2020, for example, SGA was $1,260. Now, these numbers that I've printed here, these numbers are printed annually by the Social Security Administration. And if you'll notice that on this chart, there's a regular SGA and there's a blind SGA. And when I first started in this field, I was like, wow, there's a huge difference between the regular versus the blind. What's the difference? And really the difference is, it has to do with lobbying strength. The ability of the blind community to get, the SGA numbers that they have is remarkable, in my opinion. And so, that's really the only difference. It doesn't necessarily mean anything else. But SGA in 2025, this year, is $1,620 for regular, and these are terms that Social Security uses. Regular SGA versus blind SGA, which is $2,700 a month. Now, these numbers are gross numbers, not net numbers. So if an individual is working at SGA, so they are earning $1,620 for regular SGA versus a blind SGA of $2,700, then they would either be at SGA, under SGA, or above SGA. And I'll explain why SGA is significant. You'll see why as the presentation progresses. So the second term that was highlighted that I mentioned we would discuss is medically determinable impairment. So what does that mean exactly, right? So Social Security basically says that an impairment must be medically determinable, meaning the claimant needs to prove impairment through medical records. So you cannot expect to receive disability benefits if your impairment is not something that could medically be diagnosed, treated, followed, and so on. The impairment must be diagnosable by an acceptable medical source, and Social Security also defines what is an acceptable medical source. And so for all applications filed on or after March 27, 2017, a licensed advanced practice registered nurse, also known in some states as advanced practice nurse and advanced registered nurse practitioners, for impairments within their licensed scope of practice is acceptable. So SSA recognizes, in terms of this category, they recognize certified nurse midwife, a nurse practitioner falls under this category, a certified registered nurse, and as well as a clinical nurse specialist. They all fall under this category. Now, what's incredibly important is that for Social Security purposes, diagnosis is not a disability. So just because you are diagnosed with, say, autism, it doesn't really mean anything for Social Security. It doesn't mean that you are eligible for benefits, right? So diagnosis is one thing. What Social Security is most interested in is how does this diagnosis impact you? How does it prevent you from doing gainful, successful work? The last component of disability is the duration component. And so if one has an impairment, for Social Security purposes, the impairment need to be continuous for a period lasting at least 12 months. If it does not last for at least 12 months, then it should be expected or has resulted in death. So for Social Security, if you have an impairment, and let's say the doctors basically believe that this is an impairment that will last 6 months, that it should be, be resolved within 6 months, for Social Security purposes, the person would not be eligible for disability purposes unless that person dies from that impairment. So we just talked about Social Security's definition of disability. I think the next step is to talk about the different programs under Social Security. So as we mentioned earlier, this presentation, we'll talk about SSDI, but as I mentioned, we'll also talk about SSI and DAC, which is DAC. And I'll explain what the difference are among these different programs. So essentially, Social Security has two types of disability programs. One is SSI, the other one is SSDI. Now, I mentioned DAC up here for a specific reason. DAC is really an offshoot of SSDI, and you'll see why when we get when we talk a little bit more about it later on. But for all intents and purposes, really, we're looking at two major disability programs that are administered by the Social Security Administration. So let's start with SSI. So what you need to know about SSI is that in order for an individual to be considered for SSI benefits, they need to first meet the Social Security disability criteria, which we talked about earlier, right? They need to, have not work at SGA, right? They need to have a medically determinable impairment. They need to also have this impairment needs to last or is expected to last for at least 12 months or result in death, right? So those three criteria must be met. Social Security has, as I mentioned before, the SSI program really is a wonderful program. I like to think of SSI as akin to those of you who are aware of Medicaid. SSI is similar to Medicaid in the sense that it is a Title 16 benefit, and so it is a need-based program. What this means is that because it is need-based, like Medicaid, there are income and resource limits, right? So what this means for SSI purposes, if you are applying for SSI as an individual, the most that an individual with SSI may have in terms of resources is $2,000. Now, that's for the individual. For a couple, it's $3,000. And of course, I know you're thinking, wait a minute, couple means two. Why aren't those numbers double? Unfortunately, for Social Security, and you'll see this again, that coupling does not double the individual numbers. So those are Social Security's rules that the individual is $2,000 in resources, the couple is $3,000 in resources. Now, there are some things that are exempt. Your primary residence is exempt. The car that you are using is exempt. However, real property that are owned overseas are countable. So that's something to keep in mind. And also, because SSI is a need-based program, there is an immigration status component. And so what this means is that if the individual must prove that they are either a US citizen or a licensed permanent resident before August 22nd, 1996. Additionally, transfer penalties, very similar to Medicaid, as I mentioned before, also may apply here. So transfer penalties may apply if an applicant gives away or sell resources for less than face value. And that individual may be ineligible for SSI for up to 36 months, depending on the value of the resource transferred. But what's nice about SSI, and you'll see the difference between SSI and SSD when we'll get there, is that benefits actually begin the first full month after the date of the application. What this means is, say an individual applies for SSI today, their benefits would start next month, right? So their first benefits will begin in April 1st. That being said, that does not mean that they're actually going to get benefits payments April 1st. there is a lengthy and long process to getting disability, which is something that I'll be more than happy to discuss. But in terms of their back payment, their benefits, they would be eligible to receive benefits starting next month. Now, there are no retroactive benefits for time prior to the application or the month in which you apply. So what this means is, let's say the individual applies for SSI benefits and they are looking to, they had this impairment, say it started like 2 years ago. Unfortunately, they wouldn't be eligible to receive any benefits prior to the date of the application. Also, we should know that benefits are suspended for incarceration or institutionalization. So if a person is hospitalized or the person is incarcerated, then their benefits would be suspended, and that suspension can turn into a termination if the benefits have been suspended for 12 or more months. So what exactly are we talking about in terms of SSI? So SSI, as I mentioned before, is a need-based program. And because it's a need-based program, there are discrete benefits rates. So in 2020, the benefit rate for the individual was $783. For the couple, it was $1,175. This year, 2025, the benefit rate is $767, and for a couple, it's $1,450. Now, these are, again, funds that are available to the recipient each month, right? These are monthly benefits that are available for them. Now, let's look at the other Social Security disability program, which is SSDI, and we'll see how it differs from SSI. So SSDI, also, you must meet the Social Security disability criteria that we talked about, those three markers that we talked about. Unlike SSI, which was a Title 16 benefit, SSDI is a Title II benefit, meaning there are no asset or income requirements. SSDI are benefits from the Social Security taxes that you pay when you were employed. So your primary insurance amount, which is known as PIA, is based on the claimant's FICA tax earnings. And your PIA is basically the amount that your benefits amount. It's relatively similar to that. The date of last insured is very important for an SSDI applicant, because the date of last insured is the last date the applicant or claimant is eligible to qualify for SSDI benefits. And what this typically means is 5 years after federally taxed work ends is typically the date of last insured, the DLI. And also, the applicant must have worked 5 of the last 10 years, also known as the 2040 rule. Now, if applying for SSDI benefits after the passage of the DLI, so if, let's say, you work 6 years ago, you last worked 6 years ago, and you are applying today, it does not mean that you are not eligible for benefits. What needs to happen is the applicant must show that the impairment, the onset of the impairment, was prior to the DLI. So as long as the applicant can do that, then they may be eligible for SSD. So as SSD also has, unlike SSI, a retroactive payment possible. So don't know if you recall, but when we talked about SSI initially, I mentioned that, the benefits began the next full month after, the first full month after your application, and that the applicant was not eligible for retroactive benefits. So if, let's say, you apply today, you would be eligible for SSI in April. But let's say the impairment that you're applying on actually started last year, right? Last January, say, you would not be eligible for any type of retroactive payments under SSI. However, under SSD, you are eligible for retroactive benefits. Now, the alleged onset date and is the date that you are saying that the impairment started. And so you are eligible for retroactive benefits anytime between when you said the impairment started and the application date. This is known as retroactive period. So the retroactive period, as long as it is within 12 months, the applicant is eligible for benefits. Now, unlike SSI, which had basically, the next full month, the individual would be eligible for benefits, SSI has a 5 months waiting period. And to be honest, I know, when I first tell clients this, they get very worried. But honestly, the application process typically takes more than 5 months. So by the time we get to the end of the application process, the 5 months would have elapsed. In terms of insurance, medical insurance, SSD recipients are eligible for Medicare after 24 months. And also benefits are available to legal spouse. So even if you are widowed, divorced, and if you are divorced and you must have been married for at least 10 years, and then you were divorced, no more than 2 years prior. And for your, so that's one of the things to keep in mind. That's different from SSI as well. And also benefits are available to dependent children 16 years and under. Now, this benefit I thought to include it because it is, I think, very appropriate for some of you, because so SSA, Social Security Administration, also has what is known as Disabled Adult Child, which is known as DACT benefits. Now, DACT benefits are really SSD benefits, but it is a special kind of SSD benefits. And what it does under DACT is that an adult who is medically determinably impaired or has an impairment, as long as that impairment was prior to age 22, okay, they may be eligible for SSD benefits using their parents' work history, not their own, but their parents. Typically, SSD is using your own work history, or if you're married for 10 years, you could use your spouse's work history, but DAC allows for a child to use their parents' work history. Now, in order for DAC claimant or an applicant to use the DAC benefit, the parent must be well, if not deceased, at least retired or receiving disability benefits. Now, the DAC beneficiary does not need to work, so they're not looking, Social Security will not look at that person's work history. Their benefit calculation is going to be based on their parent work history. This person needs to be at least 18 or older, right? Because the part of the name is adult, so they need to be a legal adult. However, they have to be unmarried. They have to be disabled prior to age 22, and they must also meet the adult disability requirements, which are different for child disability requirements. Now, and this is very important, if a DAC recipient marries, they may lose their DAC benefits unless they marry another DAC recipient. And lastly, if a DAC recipient earn SGA, they lose their benefits forever. So this is it's a very important disability program, and it's complicated. So if you are interested, or if you think you have someone who may be eligible for DAC benefits, I highly recommend that you reach out to an attorney for counsel. Now, let's talk a little bit about how to get those benefits, right? The application process itself. So,
Marie Elizabeth, there was a question that came up, and I think it's about transferring that Pam had. So she wrote, I understand that transfer penalty can be up to 36 months. What is the look
yes.
back period used to calculate that period?
The look back period?
Pam, do you want to get off mute and ask it in a different way? Because I might not be saying it the way you wanted me to. Pam?
So I think I kind of understand what you're saying, because
Okay.
so Medicaid has a look back period, right? And they use the term look back period in Medicaid. Yes.
Okay. So what I meant is, I understand that the penalty for the amount transferred can be up to 36 months, but how far back do they look for transfers at the time of application? For instance, a nursing home Medicaid application, there's a 5-year look back. How long is the look back for the transfers?
So that's a bit complicated. So I would say that similarly, so right now there's a 5-year period when it comes to looking at the individual's work history. I have never actually came across an issue with the transfer, to be honest with you. So I would venture to guess that it's also 5 years. But I'm not 100% certain about that.
Okay.
Because it's not like Medicaid where,
No,
where
it's just that, do they ask you, can I see your financial history from 10 years ago and then you get penalized, or 3 years ago and then we'll penalize you? It just seems so open-ended, but I understand.
Well, it's slightly different, because unlike in the Medicaid realm where you're submitting documents for social, in terms of your finances, right? You're submitting 5 years of financials. In the disability realm, Social Security has access to these numbers already, right? So they have access to your
they'll do a search based on your Social Security number for financial accounts?
Not for financial accounts, but for your tax purposes, like they have that information, right? So that's really where they're getting most of. I mean, you could certainly argue that an exemption apply, for example, right? Just like you would in the Medicaid realm. But it's slightly different. It's not like in Medicaid where you're turning over 5 years of financials.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. That makes it clear.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for your question.
Good question. Thank you.
So the disability process starts off with the application. And so the application typically occurs online, especially now more than ever. There is a push to do everything as many things as possible online. So the application typically starts online, and it's one application that Social Security has for SSI, for SSD, and also for retirement benefits. It's the same application. However, for an individual who's applying for SSI, right, there's also a telephone interview, and that's really where the SSI application is taken. Now, what happened, and we'll see the application process in the next slide. It's much more involved than simply saying, oh, you submit an application and that's it. But once an application is denied, the first appeal is at reconsideration. In reconsideration, also you request it online, or you could do it via fax or mail. It is a paper review of your case, and very much like the application, it's what happens at the application is that DDE makes the decision. So there's an adjudicator who's actually looking at all the documents that's submitted, and then they make the decision, right? With reconsideration, all that happens is a new person within that organization will look at the application and look at all the papers that the supporting documents that were submitted. That's basically it. So reconsideration is the first appeal. If that's also denied, then one can go to the hearing. At the hearing, also you apply for the request for hearing online or via mail. There, you get to actually present your case in front of an administrative law judge at the Office of Hearing Operations, also known as OHO. If the judge, the ALJ, denies, the next appeal is the appeals council. Also, you request for appeals council via online or mail. The appeals council is also a paper review. And that is decided by a panel of administrative appeal judges. If they deny, then the next appeal is federal court. Now, what I should tell you is that at every step of the appeals, so there is a 60-day appeal period. So from the application to reconsideration, say, you have 60 days, really 65 days from the date of the notice to request a reconsideration. But we'll look a little bit, we'll spend a lot more time on some of these later on. So let's look really at the application process. Like I said, you know, it's more involved, more complicated than the previous slide. So the first thing is, you know, you either call Social Security, or now you're really going online and you're putting in that request for disability, right? You submit that application. And so what happens is SSA makes a non-medical eligibility. And what this means is, especially if this step is incredibly important for if you are applying for SSDI, because remember when we talked about SSDI, we talked about the 2040 rule, right? So that's a non-medical eligibility. Do you meet that eligibility? Have you had enough quarters to be eligible for SSD benefits? So SSA makes that determination. Once that determination is made, they then transfer your file to DDS, and DDS then sends it to OTDA. Now, for some of you who are who have applied for Medicaid, you are familiar already with OTDA because they make very similar review of the application. But their entrance into the Medicaid equation is slightly different, but it's the same agency. They make the determination of disability. So that happens, the DDS reviews the record, and then once they make a determination, they return it to the Social Security Administration, and then the Social Security Administration notifies the applicant whether or not this person was approved. So here's what I can say in terms of the application. Treatment is key, right? When one is applying for disability, it is incredibly important, and we cannot stress this enough, that you get treatment from the appropriate specialist. So if you are, for example, if you are alleging a heart condition, right? We will expect that you would have had seen a cardiologist, right? If you are alleging, a heart condition, then and if you go see a psychiatrist, I mean, it's great that you're going to see someone for your mental health, but it doesn't really support or help the impairment that you are alleging, that you deserve disability for. The other thing is you should also acquire the appropriate tests. So if you are, for example, alleging an intellectual disability, it is incredibly important for you to have some type of cognitive testing done, right? So again, if you are alleging a heart condition, we need to see some type of, imaging of the heart, some type of an MRI or sonogram or ultrasound of the heart. You also, what we suggest is whenever you are applying for disability at the application level, it is important for you to obtain your medical records and give a copy to SSA. Now, a lot of my clients would say to me, but Social Security has the legal obligation to obtain my medical records. That is true. They do. They do have the legal obligation to obtain your records. However, what happens is that, at DDS basically gets these records, and then they send a request to your medical providers. And the turnaround time, sometimes the offices are not quick enough in submitting the records on time. So by the time the DDS, person receives the records, it's already too late. They've already made a decision. So we advise that you actually get the copy of the medical records yourself. And under New York state law, a medical provider cannot charge you for the records if you tell them that it is for disability purposes. Okay, so you can ask your medical provider for a copy of your records, and then you make a copy of that. You submit it to Social Security. And lastly, please pay attention to deadlines. There is a 65 days from the notice. It's 60 days, but there's a 5-day rule in which Social Security argues that it will take 5 days for you to receive the letter from the date of the notice. So you have 60 days to make to appeal any denials or any decisions you receive. Now, in 2024, really this year, Social Security released this chart. And why I present this chart to you is because I want you to see overall how the numbers look like, right? So at the initial level, Social Security is only allowing 38% of cases. So only 38% of applicants are approved, 62% are denied. At the reconsideration level, only 16% are allowed, 84% are denied. At the ALJ hearing level, okay, now you start to see the difference. You see that 51% are allowed, and that's really because it's through advocacy, whereas there's 16% dismissed and 33% are denied. And then at the appeals council level, only 1% is allowed, 3% is dismissed, 16% is remanded, and remand basically means you get another bite at the apple, and 80% are denied. In federal court, you get 1% allowed, 4% dismissed, 63% remand, again, another bite at the apple, and 32% denied. Should I stop here or can I continue?
I think that's about all the time we have.
Mm-hmm.
I know we
Yes,
could go on for quite a long time. It's a very complex topic, but thank you
yes.
so much because you were able to make some bite-sized pieces out of very difficult and again, complex systems. I did want to do you have a last slide with your information at all?
I do not. I do
Okay, that's
not.
okay.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is thank you all for being here. Are there any more questions? I'm going to be changing the screen, but are there any more questions that are on your mind while I do that?
Should I stop sharing?
Yes, please. You can come off mute or you can put it in the chat if that's better for you. So hopefully you guys can see my screen now. Marie Elizabeth, do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so these are some sources that I've used, and I know Marie has used successfully some of them in the for SSDI. And so one of the things that we find often, and if we have a lawyer in the group, please speak up. But I find that when I'm trying to refer somebody for SSDI, many law firms and different organizations, nonprofit organizations, take them after they've been denied. And so that points to what your last slide of how many people are denied the first time around. So Legal Services of Long Island is here on Long Island. So they're an excellent resource for that. As well as NILAG in the 5 boroughs, and you'll see their website. And then ALSUP is an organization, they are for-profit, the other two are nonprofit, that I came across in my, always learning new things and learning about different resources that actually just does this and starts at application. So if you yourself, friends, loved ones, clients, they're I have referred to them before and people have enjoyed them and I've heard them speak and learned a lot from them. So that might be another resource for you all that you might want to take into consideration. But there's people out there, but it feels like you're all alone, like many of the things that we do, but you're not. You were going to say something,
May
Maria
I add?
Elizabeth?
Yes, I was going to add one more resource, and that's NOSCR, which is NOSSCR. And NOSCR is very much like ALSAP, except I believe they're all appeals attorneys. They are for-profit appeal attorneys, so they're private attorneys, but all of the individuals that are involved in NOSCR are all claimant representative, and NOSCR stands for the National Organization for Social Security Claimants Representatives, so NOSSCR.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have another tool in our toolbox, right?
Yes.
So again, thank you so much, Marie Elizabeth, for being here and sharing your depth of knowledge. We so appreciate it. Thank you all who participated and your questions and just being here with us. And feel free to let me know at Care Answered if there are topics that you want to hear more about. Next month is going to be updates on Medicaid, speaking of Medicaid. And so come along with us. You'll see those invites shortly. Thanks so much, everyone, and enjoy this beautiful weather.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, everyone.
I don't know if you saw the comment. Thank you for these amazing resources.
Oh, that's
Thanks for the
great. My pleasure.
invitation. I hope you can see that because that's good stuff.
Yes, yes, yes.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Let me see if I stopped recording it.